folks. So I'm going to try to record a series here of short video lectures on ways to visualize your data besides just mapping it, right? But before we talk about how to visualize your data, we should talk a little bit more about how to explore your data set. So, hopefully by now you have looked into your data set as far as the metadata, as far as understanding where the map came from, how it was created, how up to date it is, and that type of thing. Now, before you make any data visualizations, any maps, charts, or graphs, what you should be doing is exploring your data set to learn a little bit more about it and to to understand some basic things about the data that you're working with. Okay. So here are a few things you might want to do before you actually visualize the data. So number one is data cleaning, number two is looking at the summary statistics, and number three is potentially making a histogram of your data. So what I'm talking about here primarily is tabular data. Okay, so we know that in GIS we have features which are on the map, and they're tied to a table that has some attribute characteristics in it, some kind of columns, and each column has a different characteristic related to that data, and then each row in the column is a geographic feature of some type, a point, line, or a polygon, right? So when you're looking at tabular data, you need to figure out, like, what do these different column names mean? That's really an important part of understanding the metadata about a certain data set. And you want to think about, who put this together, why, what, where, when, and how, and to look at the quality of it. So how accurate is it? So one of the things about tabular data is how somebody entered that data can really make a difference in terms of how usable the data is. So you might want to look for example, if there's a column in your data set that has either zeros or potentially some kind of indication that their data is missing, like an NA or just a blank in one of your cells, because that could make a difference. And then also there could be potential weird outliers in your data because of data entry errors, right? So when someone is putting this data in, they have to type it in, and if they type it in wrong, that's really going to mess with your data. Okay, so this could be spelling errors. This could be, in numbers, things that get transposed or missing decimal places or that kind of thing, right? So, and then you want to look at the summary statistics for your data. Okay, if you have been in a excuse me, in a stats class, you know what summary statistics are, and you may know that from math class anyway. So some examples are sum, the mean, the maximum, the minimum. What is the range of data values? So like if you look at your data values and there's a few that are way outside the normal range of where the numbers are, that might be a clue that there is some data entry errors in your data, and you might need to look at those outliers and decide if they are if they need to be thrown out, if there's something wrong with them, or if they're just normal outliers that are correct, right? So the count of something, and also what's called the standard deviation. So does your data follow a normal bell curve? Is it normally distributed? what are the standard deviations for it, and explore how your data is distributed. Okay, so data cleaning means removing errors in your data, potentially reformatting the table. So some data sets come already formatted for ArcGIS, but a lot of data sets you can put into ArcGIS, but you have to get rid of extra column headers, like over here on the upper right, probably where my face is here. You can see that there are extra column headers. Maybe things aren't formatted in the correct format, or maybe there are errors in your data. So there could be spelling errors or transposition errors, formatting errors. So you might have to do some data cleanup. Or, for example, things might be formatted in a column in a weird way, right? So the other thing is you might want to remove extraneous columns in your data. Like if your data comes with many data columns, it could be difficult to work with because there's so much information, and maybe you're only interested in a few columns. So another form of data cleanup would be removing extraneous data. Okay, and then you might need to calculate some new data fields, and in order to work with certain types of data in a table, you need to make sure that you have the right data type, that the column is the right data type. Okay, so on the bottom left or bottom right here are the most commonly used number data types. Okay, so text fields, that's pretty obvious. That's just text. Okay. There are also in ArcGIS, there are date fields. So that's pretty obvious, but the number fields are not that obvious. And in ArcGIS, there's not just one type of number field. There's actually 4 different types, okay? And they represent slightly different types of numbers. So we got short and long. So your column could say short, it could say long. So if you have an integer number, your column should say short or long. Short integer is this 32,000 kind of range. So if your numbers in your column don't range greater than around 32,000, you can use a short integer. It only takes 2 bytes of information to store short integers, so it takes up less space in the computer's memory and it will run faster. Okay, if you need to store longer integer numbers, like in the millions or billions range, then you're going to need to use a long integer, or long, right? That takes 4 bytes, so it's going to be slightly slower. Okay, if you need to have a decimal place in your numbers, right? Like if you have a percentage or a dollar amount with dollars and cents, that kind of thing, then you want to use either a float or a double. A float is a decimal point number that is relatively small. If you have a really long decimal place number, then you need a double. But so most often, for our situations, we're probably going to either choose short for short integer or float as a number with a decimal place. Okay. Another piece of data cleanup that you might have to do is once you have imported your table into ArcGIS, the columns might come in with the wrong field type on them. So it might be that you have a number
say a dollar amount in one of your fields, but when you look and you right click on the field and you look at the information about that field, it's actually has arrived into ArcGIS as a text field. If you want to do any analysis or manipulation of that data, you are going to have to change the type of data that it is. And there's not a way to change a text field once it's imported into ArcGIS. But what you can do is create a new data field and copy that over so that you have the same numbers in a new field with the correct data type in it, and then you can use that for analysis. And so the last thing you might want to do in exploring your data set is make something called a histogram. And a histogram is like a bar chart, but it shows the distribution of a certain characteristic by the frequency or count. Okay, so in this example, we have the values of petal length of some flower, and we have how many flower petals in this study had a certain length. Okay, and you'll notice that histograms have no spaces in between them, right? So each bar is right next to the other bar because all the values are accounted for here. So if you look very carefully, we've got petal lengths between 1 and 1.5 all go into that column that says almost 25, right? And then the petal lengths between 1.5 and 2 go into the next column over, right? And that's looks like around 19, right? This gives you a chance to look at the distribution of your data. So for example, if you're interested in petal length in these flowers, you could say, oh, this is sort of a bimodal distribution. If I look just at the average petal length, that doesn't tell me that much, but looking at this histogram, I can tell petal lengths in this flower are usually between 4 and 6, but also some are very short, between 1 and 2, right? Not very many fall outside of those two groupings. So it's a really great idea to make a histogram or to look at the histogram of your data in ArcGIS.